this session, we'll get right down to business, sauna business more specifically, the state of the bathing union across North America. And we have experts all over Sauna Week, but the two we have today are really top of the heap. We've got Justin, or as we like to call him at Finlandia Foundation, Jussi Juntunen, and Alan Jalasjaa to join us today. Justin, of course, is the founder and CEO of Cedar and Stone Nordic Sauna, a leader in the sauna industry, and as I understand, is on a mission over the next decade to bring 1 million people to sauna to build more resilient lives. What a goal. And Alan Jalasjaa, proud Finnish Canadian, would like nothing more than to share his passion for sauna with you through the website kivia.ca and this podcast, Kivia, the Spirit of Sauna. So with that, thank you for being here. We're glad to be partnering with you, and let's get down to business. You'll see it in Alan.
Thanks so much, Tommy, and everybody for being here. I like to be Alan's hype man, and so I just consider him the Wayne Gretzky of Canadian sauna. Al, I don't know if you're going to receive that or not, but I think, yeah, that's you in a nutshell. Tommy is quite similarly for that. What a joy to be here today with all things Finlandia Foundation National. So if you're joining us today because you have heard about this because of the National Sauna Week, we're so glad you're here. What a fun week. There is so much good programming. There's so much things going on. I highly recommend carving out some time this week and heading to a bunch of these. If you're here because you join Cedar and Stone for business webinars once a month to learn how to become a sauna business, how to get better, all that, you're a part of an even bigger room today. We're a part of a national and international movement today. That is National Sauna Week here because of Finlandia Foundation. So two teams meeting in the middle. And Alan, you and I are hitting things, talking about all things sauna business. Before we get there, I just want to encourage you, spend some time in the chat window with us. Spend some time in the Q&A window with us. We see people here from all over. I'm seeing Chicago, Connecticut, Central Wisconsin, Michigan, Oregon, BC, Canada, Ann Arbor. So glad everybody's here. We have Susie from France is here. Let us know where you're coming from. This is amazing to see people from all over. And you're going to get a little window. We want to know a little bit more about you and who's in the room. In just 1 second, Lindsay's going to pop up a poll, and it's going to quickly ask, who are you? What are you doing here? And that is, we want to know, in what ways are you interested in the business of sauna? You're either maybe an enthusiast, or you're in the process of thinking about and starting to plan starting a sauna business. Maybe you're running one. I saw my buddy Leo in the room here. Leo runs an amazing facility in Brooklyn, New York called World Spa. We've had him on this conversation before. He's going to click that I'm currently running a business. And then you might be here because I heard about this conversation through Finlandia Foundation. Feel free to click that if you are. As we're going here and people are filling out that poll, Al, it looks cold based on your background. Where are you today? How are you feeling today?
I'm feeling great, and that background doesn't give it justice. There's a lot more snow here than that picture really shows. We've received about 2 to 3 feet in the last 2 weeks, so everything's buried in snow right now, but still great sauna weather.
Amazing. Amazing. Well, you guys, Lindsay's going to show our poll. We are wonderfully split here right now. We have lots of sauna enthusiasts, about 30%. We have some folks thinking about starting a sauna business, nearly 30%. That's amazing. We're so glad you're here. You're going to hear today why we would say now's the time to get into this and what's happening broadly in the movement and in the industry. And for you folks who have opened the doors, hopefully this will be encouraging because we know how hard it is to run a business and stay afloat and work on those things and solve the problems. And for everybody here who's maybe here in this room because of National Sauna Week and you've heard of it for the first time, we're so honored to have you here as well. That's about 24% of us in the room. So let's kick off. Thank you so much for everybody to be here. Alan and I have been thinking about this for a long time now. We've actually been working on this. We've presented this at another event and conference. And what we want to highlight to you is that there is a movement happening that we like to call the State of the Union. We're going to sort of give a big snapshot for what is happening broadly in the sauna movement today. specifically in the world, what does it look like in North America? Now, that's a pretty big task to do. So we're going to give some details, we're going to give some data, and we're going to give 5 case studies to kind of look at and chew on. Before I dive in, I'm starting to intro. Before I dive in, I want to encourage you. We have so much to get through and a lot of exciting things here. If you have questions and comments, we want to address them along the way. So as they come up, when Alan starts blowing your mind with a fact that you didn't know existed, send the comment in right then. Don't wait till the end. We aren't going to pass the mic around at the end. We're going to address them as we go. So that's my encouragement. Be around the coffee table with us, hang out, and we're going to get going. So here's what the sauna movement looks like. Here's a fact. The US sauna market is projected to grow to 526 million by 2028, up from 390 million in 2023. This is kind of broadly around manufacturing, building, some things there. When we look at the experiential market, let's go here. Thermal and mineral springs globally are going to grow by 9.2%, up to 97.6 billion with a B over the next 3 to 4 years, 5 years. And this is from the Global Wellness Institute. These are some folks that if you do need market research, I would highly suggest going and checking out what they're offering. I think it's some of the best data and research out there. The biggest area of growth in this data that we're looking at right now is North America. The spots where it is growing the quickest and the most is North America right now. And so what we're going to do as we unpack these things is we're going to look at both the creativity that's happening, because it looks a whole lot different than it did 50 years ago in terms of public saunas that were oftentimes closing, and we were seeing more personal, private sauna experiences. Now the pendulum is swinging, and we're coming back to these public experiences of sauna, which I find quite exciting. And I know the team at Sauna Glow, who are doing amazing work, they're a great example of that. You get to see a little bit from their team right at the get-go. So Alan and I are going to give these case studies, and we're going to look at 5 areas. Now, this is not exhaustive. I'm so sorry if you're joining us and we won't mention your name. We can't get to quite everybody, but we're going to highlight 5 areas that we think are really impactful, that are going to do some sort of kind of high watermarks that we want to say, here's what's happening in a region, and here's some examples of that. Al, our number 1 is one of your favorite places in the world. It is the Pacific Northwest. Yep. And I would love if you kicked off and you talked about the nature and beauty of all things sauna up in that beautiful part of the world.
Thanks, Justin. Just to give everybody a little bit of background on myself, I grew up in Ontario, where I received what I thought was a good introduction to nature. Prior to my arrival on this earth, my Finnish grandparents had actually built a modest cottage in a region known as the Kawarthas. It's about 2 hours north of Toronto. And this is where I spent most of my summers as a youth, enjoying lakeside saunas, fishing, talking with the loons, and generally soaking up every ounce of nature that our lake could provide. I thought I had a pretty good understanding on what nature was all about until I went to university in Victoria on Vancouver Island, BC. I'll be honest, I was totally awestruck with the beauty of the West Coast scenery. There was something about the sound and aroma of the ocean and the calmness of the mountains that really spoke to me. And after graduation from university, it was really hard to leave BC. But fortunately, the West Coast always stayed in my heart. Now, that was 30 years ago, but if you zoom ahead to current times, I still find myself returning to the West Coast quite often. I think I have an itch that just can't be scratched, but now it's for different reasons. Anyone who knows me knows that I'm always on the move, and the West Coast has become one of my favorite places to visit on my sauna travels, with the exception of Finland, of course. For all of us who understand how important the nature component is to a quality sauna experience, one would think that the West Coast would naturally be the center of the universe for sauna enthusiasts in North America. But the reality is that the West Coast has always been a little bit behind the rest of the country in terms of music, technology, adapting to new lifestyles. Sauna is one of them. So surprisingly, there are relatively few saunas in the Pacific Northwest. There's actually only around 20 to 30 public saunas for a population of about 18 million. They're in fairly low-key locations, and most of them are relatively new, new meaning less than 10 years old. For those of you that haven't been to the West Coast, I'd like to give you an idea on what you can expect to find if you were to visit. I'd like you to imagine discovering a sauna stationed right by the ocean in Squamish, BC, or experiencing one of the many floating saunas in places like Tofino, North Vancouver, or Seattle, or one of my personal favorites, having a deep forest sauna in Sequim, Washington, where after you finish your session and you're relaxed and you're chilling out, your host comes around with freshly caught oysters, so fresh and briny that you feel like you can actually taste the ocean. Now, you may be asking, what do oysters have to do with Finnish sauna? Well, nothing really, except that it illustrates that a sauna is a multi-sensory experience, no matter where you are. Now, what makes these saunas that I just mentioned so special is how their operators have deliberately designed each space to provide an intimate experience. Small groups of 4 to 12 people, fostering a sense of community among the sauna bathers and with a connection to nature. It's that simple. Small and intimate with a focus on nature appears to be one definite direction that the West Coast scene is heading in, and it makes sense based on the distribution of the population. Certainly, there are some traditional brick and mortar saunas in existence, but they too are relatively small, and in the short term, they are definitely the exception, not the norm. Now, in terms of market growth, the potential here is massive, as the amount of natural beauty is almost endless, and the desire and the need to connect to nature is abundant. And I believe that the element of nature will accelerate the demand for saunas in the Pacific Northwest more than any other rural area. The good news is, if the general expectation from the public is for small, intimate saunas, that's going to make it relatively easy for new saunas to be opened. Mobile and pop-up saunas are already widely accepted at this time, and this makes sauna more noticeable and accessible. In my opinion, the West Coast sauna scene is in its infancy stage. There is massive opportunity for anyone thinking about opening a public sauna, and I would encourage it. We'll talk about this more detail later, but I will say this for now. Not only have we not yet met the tipping point, I would say the market isn't even booming yet. But give it time, it absolutely will. People are starting to figure things out here. In particular, there are numerous projects either being built or planned to be built in the major urban centers of Vancouver, Seattle, and Portland. In essence, the interest in public sauna has gone from next to nothing to literally being on the verge of something grand. This past January, the West Coast Sauna Summit had its inaugural gathering in Vancouver, and this will definitely help in the development of a more robust sauna culture by gathering together like-minded sauna operators and enthusiasts. So this is what's going on from BC through Washington and Oregon and into Northern California. But as we continue to travel south, we see a difference in the approach to general sauna practices. Justin.
Yeah, Al, before we leave the beauty of the Pacific Northwest, I just want to double down and say there's people on here literally saying, thank you for Alan's poetry for the Pacific Northwest. It is a gift. And I just love this idea. And we have some people on here right now already starting to ask questions of, okay, if it's grassroots, what does that mean? If it's grassroots, how do we get these things off the ground? And we've had people kind of already commenting, say, oh, I used to go to the old public saunas in Astoria. Hey, I've been a part of that Hoping to launch Seattle Sauna Festival ASAP, says Ryan Davis. Amazing. Quinn is asking, hey, are there any regulations that we should watch out for in the Pacific Northwest around floating sauna with a wood oven? Quinn, I was in Seattle a week and a half ago delivering a floating sauna with not just one, but two wood ovens, wood stoves, Finnish Ikki stoves. And when I think about these kind of areas that are new emerging markets, when you ask the question around, are there any regulations? There's often very little, or the entrepreneurs who are in those are needing to teach the regulating bodies what is possible and what is safe. So Alan's a great example of this. He's kind of, I said he was Wayne Gretzky earlier. He's also a supportive consultant in those sort of ways to help people get over and through educating their local regulatory bodies. And I would say our team does that as well as we work with sauna businesses around the country, as we're saying, hey, let's understand how we communicate this, because most folks don't understand it. People on this, hey, everyone on this call, we're weird, and we're like 3% of the population who cares about sauna and knows a bit about it. Most people don't. And so we need to be the people that kind of focus in here, educate the public, teach the public, dare I even say, serve the good experience at the highest quality. Al, would you want to just riff anything else on, Pacific Northwest other than eating oysters after the sauna, which sounds like a literal dream? Any other riff that you want to get into on there before we move?
Well, like you've pointed out, there's certainly a lot of challenges with regulations, and it seems to go one of two ways. Either it's over-regulated because areas don't understand what they're dealing with, and they err on the side of caution, so they make a lot of rules, or they need a lot of studies. So that's a bit of a hindrance, and that's, like you said, that's one of the things I try to do is meet with municipalities and walk them through the process so that they can understand what they're really dealing with and not be so fearful that it is something that is really basic and simple. They just need to get their head around it. So I do that a lot. I do that a lot. I do talk to a lot of areas. On the other side, yeah, in some ways, there's just that knowledge. And so how do you create a regulation on something you don't understand? So that sometimes that creates a good opportunity that you can explore something or dive into something without being told necessarily what to do. You respect the traditions and history of sauna, but you also have the ability to be creative. So that's really exciting for younger generations when they want to put their stamp on the sauna business.
That is right on. And Chris says, really, having a sauna in my blood makes me weird? The worst rule, no water on the rocks, as it will cause a fire. Voy, voy. Chris, yes, we are not. We come with a knowledge around this that is different. We understand that you know the good quality. We're not calling you weird. We're just weird to some other Americans who have never experienced the goodness of it. And I think that's why a lot of the people are in the room. Now, let's go from Pacific Northwest. Let's lean in now. Let's travel south a little bit, and let's move over to Southern California. Now, as we think about broadly the Southwest, I'm going to highlight two areas here. I'm going to go to Southern California and then to the broader Southwest and the Rockies. What we're seeing is an emphasis on science, soaking, and space. Now, you purists in the room, give me just a moment to describe some of how LA and the surrounding areas are understanding sauna. If you were at the most recent webinar, I think this was yesterday with Dr. Eric Lee, it was all about the science of sauna. And what I believe is happening right now is the cultural traditions that many of us in the room know now are being backed up by science. And because of that, we have a movement that is now informed not by cultural wisdom only, but by data, research, and the broader medical community. More and more needs to be done around this, but I would say we're seeing a huge growth in the market, largely due to this data backing it up, and a lot of people saying, interesting, this is good for my body. This is interesting. How do I get the health benefits of sauna? Now, if you go to Finland, the health benefits are not what are talked about. The question is not how hot is the sauna. The question is, Al, back me up here, how's the lolu? It's what does it feel like? It's a qualitative question of how good is the food and what does it taste like? How are they serving it? How does the sauna feel? North America doesn't know that yet, so we're starting to get there. And a lot of the growth is around science. We are seeing a lot of places opening up sauna as health modality, like what we're seeing here in Remedy Place in Los Angeles. Very beautiful, very opulent. They're going to serve you a whole bunch of things, including IV drips, additional support, red light therapy, cold plunge, all these things, which are backed by some levels of data to say, here, come feel good. We're seeing, especially in LA, where this is such an emphasis, we're seeing a lot of spaces, often smaller, but high-end experiences, because real estate is expensive in these places, leaning in on the science, leaning in on the benefits. Now, in the broader Southwest, we're actually seeing way more expansive elements. You see one here. This is just outside of Dallas, and this is in the Southwest, World Springs. And it is a beautiful place of tons of different thermal baths, hot tubs, saunas, all to sort of enjoy and soak. When I think about what's happening broadly in the Southwest, it is the experience of discovering these things for new people who have never known them. It's the introduction of these elements at scale and to the public broadly in ways that if you are up in the north like me or Alan, might seem of course, right? We've known that a lot. But in the Southwest, they're being discovered often in new ways and at higher qualities than they've ever been served. So we're seeing that as I would say, exciting. And we're trying to say, what would it look like to do that with an eye towards culture? Because America has a tendency to also McDonald'sification of any type of cultural gift, right? What's the fast, quick, cheap, easy way to get that thing out to the public? And so therein lies where the movement needs to be sort of caring about boundaries, caring about process, caring about not just regulation, but also about culture. And so there's a tension in there. Al, do you have anything as we're going to move to sort of some additional big urban areas in a minute? I've been talking for a little bit, but is there anything else you want to riff on this broader concept of the tension between science, soaking in space in the Southwest or broadly throughout North America?
Yeah, I think I'll cover it in the next section because we pretty much tap onto what you're saying, that struggle or that battle. And
Yep.
well, I'll use some hyper examples in the metropolitan areas to kind of walk us through what's going on.
Yeah. Well, let's go there. And I suggest as you guys are coming along, feel free, tap in the chat window, tap especially in the Q&A window. We want to hear your questions as we go. Alan, take us over, not to the Southwest, but to our burgeoning metropolitan hubs. What is happening there?
Yeah, so one of the specific areas that Justin just pointed out within California was LA, which perhaps is developing its own sauna culture, even if it's not necessarily recognizable. So as hyper examples, what I'd like to look at next are two of the largest metropolitan areas in North America, that being New York City and Toronto. Now, the reality is that the vast majority of our population lives in larger urban centers, and each has its own rich history, culture, and ecosystem. Some have Finnish influences, while others do not. So Finland does provide a model that helps North America to dive deeply into a culture that has fully embraced sauna. And I'm really happy to see so many North American sauna operators making the pilgrimage to Finland or consulting with a Finnish sauna builder before constructing their saunas. But regardless of whether or not there is a Finnish influence, when you have so many varying lifestyles in such a concentrated area, you're going to see a diverse range in what sauna means to different people. For some, it's about finding a safe, quiet space where they can relax, disconnect, and recharge, perhaps in a traditional Finnish sauna or a Russian banya for that matter. For others, it's about maximizing their performance and productivity in a sauna space designed with recovery in mind. And some are seeking hyper social gatherings or a directed experience. Although I must admit, this is counterintuitive for Finns where we let our mind and bodies tell us how to take sauna on any given day. And in terms of their time spent in these saunas, some people are focused on the immediate gratification, while others are more interested in the long-term health benefits. Again, something that is generally less important to Finns. Still, yet another way to look at this diverse range is that the traditional saunas represent the foundation of our sauna culture in these cities, while newer saunas represent the evolution and modern interpretation of our culture now that the global trend has momentum, but they both need each other. With such a varied offering, time will tell what meets people's collective needs. Many industries have experienced the battle between what is traditional or authentic versus what is new and shiny. Eventually, we could expect all major cities in North America to have their own unique but noteworthy sauna cultures. Many of these already have and are well on their way. In terms of opportunity, just like the Pacific Northwest, we have not yet reached a tipping point or market saturation. The demand for saunas is high, and there is no limit to the creativity available to build them. Even though it might currently feel like we're experiencing a gold rush, it's actually more of a renaissance or a resurgence, referring to the 70s and 80s, where the number of public saunas in North America was once quite notable. But this time it's under better global market conditions, and it will undoubtedly last longer. Now, one particular danger that we should all be aware of is what happens when the quality and the traditions are compromised and the creativity goes unchecked. This is a particular concern to most traditional Finns, and I too share this concern. Fortunately, we have deep-rooted traditions in other parts of the country that hopefully will stand the test of time and will keep us on the right path.
So Alan, there's a lot of questions here when you're pushing this innovation angle, right? There's a lot of chat right now in the chat window of both cost and of quality and of tradition and culture. Let's talk for a minute about how those things interact, right? And how they sort of bump into one another. Because I think most of us on this call, even high achieving entrepreneurs, have a general sense that they want this to be for all. They want this experience, which we know is so good, to be for as many people as possible. And it actually costs something to run businesses and pay good employees and get good wages, right? And if you come from a Finnish background like mine or like yours with that picture in the back, somebody probably has given you free sauna your whole life. And so there's a tension to sort of what is this worth and what's this value of the thing. I saw Chris was mentioning here, there's sort of a Finns can be a touch frugal as well. Well, I think that's true, and I would lean in here, Chris, and say, what is sauna worth? What's the value of the experience that you're providing is how we should broadly think about pricing. Alan, talk to me a little bit about culture, innovation, and cost here in North America today. What are you seeing?
Well, there definitely is a struggle because people are getting into the sauna business for different reasons. Some actually are just looking at it purely from the business point of view. They're managing their costs to build the saunas, and they're evaluating how much can they charge to get return on investment. So that's probably one end of the spectrum. And I understand that. I respect that completely. And then you look at the other end of the spectrum where people they're so connected to sauna, whether it's their heritage or just been going to sauna all their lives. They truly love sauna. They understand what it can provide people, and they just want to find a way to make it happen. And they probably, to their fault, maybe spend less time on the business side of things. So there's the opposite ends of the spectrum, and what we need to do is find that balance or that harmony somewhere in between, where there's attention to the business because it is a business and there are lots of costs involved, but at the same time staying true to the spirit of sauna, which at times can be a little bit subjective instead of objective. So it's just one of those struggles that will always happen, and it's all about balance. It's all about harmony.
I think that's right. And there's some really good chat kind of going on broadly here in the chat window and in the Q&A. You know, I would say some of my take on this is 15 years ago when the craft brewing movement hit North America broadly, somebody started selling a $7 pint of IPA beer. Somebody started selling a $10 to $12 10-ounce pour of Imperial Stout. And for folks that have been drinking big beer, light beer for their entire life, that sounded crazy. And it wasn't necessarily because those local breweries needed to sort of get rich quick. They were trying to cover their costs, and they were carrying, and the thing that they were serving cost more to make. And so when we compare immediately to European markets, leaning in and focusing in on things that are oftentimes truly a public good. Tucker, you just mentioned that in here. Truly a public good and oftentimes municipally financed or run. We can have an experience where, yeah, egalitarian, anybody can get in, anybody can buy the membership. I think we're seeing some people try that here in the States, and we're seeing some people, like these craft breweries, get unique and think about costs. And if you're building in a big city, it is going to cost quite a bit. It just will. If you're in Sequim, Washington in the forest and you've built a mobile sauna, there's definitely going to be a lower barrier of entry in terms of your investment to start your business up. And so I think to sort of just speak to frugal Finns who have last names like mine and Alan's, I would encourage you to consider the cost of entrepreneurship for a business before quickly sort of downplaying the chance that they might simply be offering that to a different part of the market. They might be providing that to folks that have never thought about sauna, but are seeing a thing that now is interesting to them. And I think there's going to be, like in yoga, a whole variety of sauna businesses. There will be the crunchy yoga studio that's pay as you go. There's going to be the high-end yoga studio that's very expensive and very opulent. I think the same is going to happen for sauna. We're actually going to see that spectrum of businesses happen in a way that mimics these wellness spaces, because there will be markets for each of them. And hopefully you're even seeing in our examples here, examples of businesses like that already. We're seeing high-end, we're seeing unique, we're seeing backwoods, different expressions of that. Michael, shout out to the granola crowd. Absolutely. Let's keep them going. Let's keep the woo-woo vibes going. So Al, where should we go next?
Well, I think we were going to go back to the Midwest there. You're going to walk us through where all of this really started in North America, which is, the Minnesota, Wisconsin, and the UP.
Did you hear how he leaned in there with a nice a Minnesota? This is Canadian as well as upper Midwest language here. Let me tell you guys what's happening in the far north here. And we've looked at both that sort of grassroots growing Pacific Northwest. We've looked at some big markets and some metropolitan fast areas. The Great Lakes region broadly has kind of been this belt. Some people refer to it as the sauna belt. Some people see it because of the immigrant paths over the last 100 years of more, it's just in the water here. What I would say has happened over the last decade, specifically here in Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Ontario, is there have been entrepreneurs working on these things and these questions for around a decade. And we sort of stand on the shoulders, our business right alongside Superior Sauna and Shaylin Crutchley, if Shaylin's in the room, John Peterson and Thermoculture, Glenn Auerbach and Sauna Times, Katie and Sisu and Lolu, which is pictured here right on the shores of Lake Superior. And what we've seen is a movement that's gone from those grassroots days, mobile saunas in parking lots, trying to figure out how to get at the state park, try to get this into the world in a new way, to really being met as a cultural understanding of this is what we do in the winter. This is how we do this throughout the year. And here's examples of businesses who are kind of in their adolescent growth stage. We have that here, and you're seeing an image that was in the New York Times. We've had 2 articles in the New York Times. When you get the biggest press looking at your local towns and municipalities saying this, something good is happening because the attention is noticed. And so when I would say we've looked at that, some of the contours are we've had a bunch of committed entrepreneurs who have slogged through the difficulties of regulation, who have pushed to make these things accessible and possible, that have educated tens of thousands of people every single year, if not hundreds of thousands of people, if we look broader, and say, these are the ways we should understand sauna in this place. Here's how to do this safely. Now, the reason why I bring that up is because this is not true everywhere. But here in the upper Midwest, we've made some growth, we've made some movement. You see the mayors and the political figures and the people who make some of those decisions as members. You see them with their towel on, enjoying the sauna, taking a picture, sharing and saying, look, we're doing this thing that which we do here. And so whether we're the heart of it or not, or the capital of it, I think those are just fun ways to sort of be proud of your area. I want to say to everybody else in all these other regions that it's actually very possible to move the needle publicly, to move the needle regulatory, and to move the needle for businesses opening and continuing to open. And we're seeing that here in places like Duluth, Minnesota, and broadly the upper Midwest. So I think, you know, most of my suggestion here to everybody is the work is worth it. Sauna Glow and folks who are doing this as like you're in your first months of opening, absolutely. And continue to be pushing forward, continuing to find new ways to get more people there. You're actually serving a thing to most Americans that they, again, have never experienced before in their lives. And the sauna is going to do the heavy lifting. The sauna will make them feel good at the end, no matter how well kept your front entrance is. And the more well kept it is, the better the chance we're going to have an experience where more and more people are going to want to keep coming back. And so I sort of think about the Midwest, the upper Midwest, and broadly the Great Lakes region as this kind of celebratory moment where we've actually tipped the scales just enough, where it's normal here and there's entrepreneurs here who are sort of linked arm in arm. And if I could just highlight one maybe last thing here, and then Al, I'd love to see what you're riffing on with this. I would encourage towards an environment that is cooperation over competition. If all of those little craft beer companies said only drink our beer, they would have probably ate each other up at the very beginning. They would have fought at each other and not gotten as far. And what was happening was people were drinking craft beer for the first time, and it actually made it possible, because more people in the market wanted good beer, to open a new brewery in the next neighborhood, the next town, the next city. And that grassrootsification of things continued to sort of bring everybody up. So the moment when you're wanting to critique somebody else's business, say, wait a minute, they're doing my marketing for me right now for free. They are teaching the American market, the Canadian market, the broader North American market to appreciate a thing which is far underappreciated here in North America. And it gives me an opportunity, it gives us an opportunity to continue to do it better in the public sphere. That is the kind of ethos of cooperation and collaboration over competition in business. Now, the competition side is you also want to make it good. And competition means everybody needs to get up to par, right? And we need to keep supporting each other. So I'd like to highlight that. I'd like to support that. Alan, what are you, as we think about the upper Midwest, you're on one side of it on the Great Lakes region. What would you add and what should we riff on here?
Well, the important thing is, like I mentioned before, we're not at a tipping point yet. There's lots of business for everybody. So why are we fighting over it? We should be working together. I'm a firm believer in collaboration instead of competition. And it helps everybody find their own personal sauna, their sauna space. What you have may not be the right one for somebody. It's going to be better for someone else, and vice versa. So if you share in that common goal of helping people find their personal sauna space, then we all benefit from that in the long run. In terms of business, it absolutely means more business for everybody. So it's convincing some people that's the best route to go. It's tough at times, but it is absolutely, trust me, the best way to go.
Absolutely. So now we've gone from the West Coast all the way through the Great Lakes, and we've been tracking this idea broadly of grassroots guerrilla warfare, getting things off the ground into these innovative spaces where it's very new, into now the broader Great Lakes region, which is maybe an adolescence around this. Alan, would you take us to the bastion of mature sauna culture broadly in North America, and that being Quebec? What has been happening there? Because we need to look at the place that's done it well for the longest amount of time.
Yeah, it is an area we need to look at. And, as we explore the makeup of these various regions in terms of sauna culture, one of the best kept secrets in North America is the province of Quebec in Canada. Quebec is known to have a distinctive European style of history, language, and culture. And one part of their culture to note is the fact that Quebecers love their swimming pools and hot tubs. But this is in regards to their own private homes. How did this element evolve into a significant public sauna culture, you might ask? Well, actually, public bathing initially came from the sports and recovery field when a number of hockey players from the Montreal Canadiens were involved in founding the first recognizable spas in Quebec in the late 1990s. I use the term spa here because this is how they are identified there. So, quite quickly, the first spa, which was known as the Polar Bear Club, grew to become part of the founding four. Then more of these recovery spaces opened, where hot and cold water, hot tubs, and pools were the main themes, just like their homes. Saunas were not actually included in the original offerings, they were added later. Even though these first spaces were simple, cold pools to reduce inflammation and hot tubs to stimulate circulation, it was the social time in between that caught on, and voila, a spa market was born. Around 2010, Amerispa noticed the popularity and business opportunity in the market and began promoting the combination of the spa and hotel into a destination experience, thus quickly growing the total number of distinct and recognizable spas in Quebec to more than 50. That was 2010, and here we are in 2025, 15 years later, and currently there are more than 110 spas in Quebec for a population of 9 million people. To put this in perspective, Quebec has approximately the same population as New York City and half the population of the Pacific Northwest at approximately 18 million. But the numbers tell only one part of the story. Recognizing the need and value, the Quebec Spa Association was founded in 2012, today of which the majority of spas in Quebec are members. 13 years later, the association has a clear set of priorities to maintain overall quality standards, to provide training, to invest in and conduct studies, to promote their members, etc. The Quebec spa market has become an example in North America of how 30 years can produce a self-sustaining and robust community. And even though 30 years have already passed, the Quebec market is still growing and evolving along with the greater global trend. For example, spas in Quebec have traditionally been almost exclusively water-based. Now, more than ever, saunas are being introduced into these spaces, and importantly, more clients are using them. And this is not to forget that more pop-up and mobile saunas and other small spaces are available that are above and beyond the number of spas being accounted for. There's no secret that in terms of demographics, sauna around the world has often been associated with older men. But that's not the case in Quebec, where their guests are traditionally mostly middle-aged women, 40 to 60 years old. More men are going to the spas now, but it's still predominantly women who are going, and the average age is definitely getting younger. The settings were also traditionally very quiet, but now they're becoming more social, If you look at Boda in Montreal, they actually have a new dedicated social area. In general, the Quebec region is a classic case study in how to grow a spa or a sauna market, and the rest of North America can certainly learn from their history. Now, previously, I talked about tipping points or market saturation, so I'd like to conclude my portion of this webinar with some statistics to put things in perspective. It has been estimated that 1% of North American households have saunas, which equates to approximately 1 million saunas in the US or 120,000 saunas in Canada. 3 to 4% of the North American population, this is something that Justin mentioned earlier, engaged in sauna at some degree of regularity, and 5 to 10% have tried a sauna at least once in their lives. On Monday's webinar, Risto from ISA mentioned that the rate of growth is expected to be around 7% annually for the next 4 or 5 years. In relative terms, it's a modest amount of growth, and we have a long way to go until we reach the Finnish benchmark, where 90% of Finns visit the sauna at least once per week. Here is where I call upon all Finns to help us achieve that level in North America. Quite briefly, I just wanted to share some of the current developments that are going on in North America. More larger scale facilities are being planned and built in North America. Therm Group has some grand plans for facilities in Dallas, Texas, Washington, D.C., and Toronto. Group Nordique here in Canada has plans for 10 new spas in 10 years. Scandinave, very similar plans to Group Nordique. And there are a host of smaller boutique saunas that are adding second, third, and fourth locations to their offerings. And finally, here are some of my predictions. As regulations like the governance of health standards, insurance, etc., become better understood and more data becomes available, red tape will lessen and certain costs will moderate, thus reducing the barrier to entry. There will become more mobile and small-scale saunas with more flexibility and better offerings, and with a higher standard, and with more appeal to the masses, like the UK and Ireland are already experiencing. The reason this will happen is because people will become more discerning over time as they learn more and explore the sauna culture deeper, and they will seek the better facilities or those more in tune with their personal needs. In the UK, Ireland, and Japan, bathhouses are replacing bars and pubs as the preferred place for young people to gather, socialize, and connect. And that's in a more healthy environment. We have already seen a similar trend in North America, which will undoubtedly continue. Wellness tourism is going to continue to flourish. It's an exciting time to be in the sauna business.
Al, I love this suggestion that now is the time, right? And I come with the chance that we talk with lots of entrepreneurs all the time. I think Tommy and the Finlandia Foundation team, they tapped us because we work with these visionaries, Alan and I, kind of every single day. We're designers and consultants and builders, and we're sort of looking with a little bit of a zoomed out view at North America, as opposed to just running one space in one kind of region. And the thing that I'd like to just add on here, and please send over your questions. We do have a little bit of time for some more riffing and discussion, but I'd just like to add, you know, over the last 5 years, the location of origin stories has changed. Before it was, I went to Europe and I saw a thing and I asked, why don't we have it here? It's I was in Finland, I was somewhere else, I was in a spot where I believe this thing could exist in our neighborhood. And now, as we're seeing this movement change, as we're seeing these places open, the origin stories are actually happening right here on North American soil. And they're saying, hi, I went to Sauna House with Gavin. Gavin's texting right in the chat window right now. I went to Sauna House, now I want to start something there. They say, I went to Othership in Toronto, not far from Allen. They're going to be saying, I went to Sauna Glow in Portland with Michael and the team there. They're they're having these experiences of localized expressions, and they say, well, wait a minute, what is possible now in my city, in my town, and for my people? And so as we think about this, as we lean in on these types of things, I want to continue to encourage the broader movement that's happening, that this is possible. And if we lean in on this together, we're actually going to be able to get over the pitfalls, the dangers, the regulatory struggles. And we're going to find ways to do that together. So that's a sweep of the North American sauna movement. That's the State of the Union. And Alan, thank you for bringing so much expertise, so much both broad sort of industry examples, all the way down to the storytelling at the level of having oysters after a sauna on the beach. And I think that is what's happening right now. I think we're in this moment where we're going to be able to do this. And we're going to continue to see experiences of that happening. Now, before we wrap, there's a couple of questions we want to get to, and we want to highlight. If you have any final ones, send them in immediately now. We're going to try to get to a couple, and then don't leave. We have a raffle, and we have a winner, and that winner's in the room. That might be you. So before we do, one of the questions that came up really early was, do you have any suggestions for best resources or sources for financing for starting a sauna business? Are there any grants available in North America for sharing cultural heritage that entrepreneurs might be able to tap into for this purpose that you're aware of? Great question. I will say this, Al, you can feel free to double down. Funding is going to be and is the biggest hurdle for most businesses getting off the ground. And that funding is going to be determined, getting capital and getting enough is determined on your model and your location. If you need a mobile sauna, that is great. You're not going to need as much money as opening a 10,000 square foot public bathhouse in Quebec, like we saw. That building is beautiful and expensive and costs a lot of money to build. And so cultural grants, I think, can be a part of your funding structure, but they are not going to be enough. You will get some support from a cultural grant. I think that's going to be great, but it's not going to be enough. And so I would encourage you to look at your local SBA, SBDC, kind of those proper sort of how do I start a business in my area resources. And then look at what is the scale in which you're trying to build, because that's really going to determine how you fund it. We see a lot of folks going to private equity. We see a lot of folks trying to start up a thing at a smaller scale with a bigger vision in the future to prove the model and then to grow it. And we see folks getting larger sort of bank financing, governmental loans, those sorts of things to get it off the ground. There's not a one quick fix, and there's not a easy answer to getting over the funding piece to it. But I really suggest, it's going to be one of the problems you're going to hit. Work with people who understand real costs. Most times it takes longer than you think it would, and it's more expensive than you initially expect. And you think you're going to make more money in that first year than you probably will. Let's zoom all those back and say, if those are true, how do I work with people who save me money to begin, save me time to begin, and support me to move faster? And so those are all those ways. Alan, I know you're doing that with a number of entrepreneurs. We do that with a lot of entrepreneurs. We're in our training programs and education and consulting programs. And also entrepreneurs who are good, they're crazy enough to think they can bring something into the world. They're crazy enough to think, wait a minute, it doesn't matter. I'm going to do this. We're going to make this happen. It needs to happen. And if you have that sort of ache in your heart, I want to say, notice that, and then figure out how to make it possible. Al, would you add anything else here, or do you want to hit another question?
I think you pretty much nailed it, but due to lack of time, let's see if we can find a question. People can always reach out to us later to get into more detail.
Yep. So you guys feel free to reach out to us. We have sent over some links and some details there. There are so many good things happening around this. We want to just continue to encourage and tell you that there are so many important things happening in this week specifically. So huge shout out to the Finlandia Foundation national team and the ways that they've curated this. I highly suggest getting to the Mikael Ahland discussion at the end of the week It is going to be lights out. So go check out all of the events that are happening this week. We have more today and over the next couple days. You guys, it is noon where I am. We've spent an hour together. Thank you to Finlandia Foundation. Thank you to Alan and all that joined us. What an amazing time to be here. And what an amazing time to be in the sauna industry. The movement is happening as we speak. We're so excited to be a part of it with you. And we will see you all on the next one. Thanks, you guys.